samsaradava nallaridaloka Junaya karunaganaganatvam Bhaktasya kayana gunaravasya Vande Guru Shri Charanarvindam Mahaprabhu Kirtana Nitya Gita Padichamadhyam Anasurasena Romanchakam Pahasutaranga Vajo Vande Guru Shri Charanarvindam Shri Vigraharadhana Nichanana Shingaratan Mandiramajinado Tasya Bhaktam Saniyunjatopi Vande Guru Shri Charanarvindam Chatuvidashi Bhagavat Prasado Swadvana Chiptan Hari Bhakta Sangha Kirtaiva Chiptim Bhajata Sadaiva Vande Guru Shri Charanarvindam Vande Guru Shri Charanarvindam Vande Guru Shri Charanarvindam Shri Radhikama Havayurapara Madhurya Lila Gunarupanana Shri Radhikama Pratikshana Swandana Lolupasya Vande Guru Shri Charanarvindam Pratikshana Swandana Lolupasya Vande Guru Shri Charanarvindam Vande Guru Shri Charanarvindam Vande Guru Shri Charanarvindam Nikunjayuno Ratikelisidai Jayali Bhiktira Bhikshanina Nikunjayuno Tatarati Dakshan Atibalamasha Bande Guroshi Charanarabindam Bande Guroshi Charanarabindam Bande Guroshi Charanarabindam Shakshadhari Chena Samasta Sasti Yuktastata Bhavyate Vasadi Kinto Prabhuya Priya Eva Dasya Ande Guru Shri Charanarabindam Bande Guru Shri Charanarabindam Bande Guru Shri Charanarabindam Yasha Prasada Bhagavad Prasada Yasha Prasada Nanakatika Tobi Yasha Prasada Dayam Shridvam Stasya Yasasti Sandam Dayam Shridvam Stasya Yasasti Sandam Dayam Shridvam Stasya Yasasti Sandam Bande Guru Shri Charanarabindam Dayam Studvam Stasya Yasasti Sangam Bande Guru Shri Charanarabindam Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Pristaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Iti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvisesa Sunyavadi Vaskatyade Satarine Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Bhakta-vindam Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Chaitanya Babu Nityananda Chaitanya Vaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhakta-vindam Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhakta-vindam Jaya Shri Krishna Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhakta-vindam Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna. Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Nitai Gora Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Gora Hari Bol, Nitai Gora Hari Bol, Nitai Gora Hari Bol, Hari Bol. Hari Bol, Nitai Gaura Hari Bol. Shrestha? Is Shrestha here? Okay, Shrestha is not here? No, okay. Then one of the ladies, you want to sing? You want to sing Dhammadarastakam? Okay, good. Oh, okay, Shrestha is here, I'm sorry.
Namamishwaram Satchidanandarupam Lasatkundalam Gokule Brajamanam यशोदाभियोलुकलाधवमानम् परामृष्टमत्यन्ततो धृतगोप्या
यशोदेवीयोलुकलाधवमानम् परामृष्टमत्यन्ततो धृतगोप्या
रुदन्तं मुहुर्नेत्रयुग्मामृजन्तम् कराम्भोजयुग्मेन सातङ्कनेत्रम् मुहुश्वासकं पात्रीरेखाङ्ककण्ठ स्थितग्रैवं दामोदरं भक्तिबद्धम् इति दृक्ष्वलीलाभिरानन्दकुण्डे स्वघोषं निमज्जन्तम् आख्यापयन्तम् तदेशितज्ञेषु भक्तैर्चितत्वं पुनर्प्रेमतस्त्वं सता वृत्तिवन्दे वरं देवमोक्षं न मोक्षं वदिं वा न चान्यं वृणेऽहं वरेशदपीह
वरं देवमोक्षं न मोक्षवदिं वा न चान्यं वृणेऽहं वरेशदपीह
इदं ते वपुर्नाथ गोपालबालम् सदा मे मनस्य विरस्तं किमन्ये
इदं ते वपुर्नाथ गोपालबालम् सदा मे मनसा विरस्तं किमन्ये
इदं ते मुखाम्बोजम् अत्यन्तनीलम् वृतं कुन्तलैः स्निग्धरक्तैश्च गोप्या
वितं कुन्तलैः स्निग्धरक्तश्च गोप्या
मुहुश्चुम्बितं बिम्बरक्ताधरं मे मनस्या विरास्तम् आलं लक्षलाभै
चुम्बितं बिम्बरक्तं धरामे मनसा विरास्तम् आलं लक्षलाभै
नमो देव दामोदर अनन्त विष्णु प्रसीद प्रभो दुःखजलब्धिमग्नम्
धरन्त विष्णु प्रसीद प्रभो दुःखजलब्धिमग्नम्
कृपादृष्टिवृष्ट्यातिदिनं बतानु गृहाणेश मामज्ञमेध्यक्षिदृश्य
कृपादृष्टिवृष्ट्यातिदिनं बतानु गृहाणेश मामज्ञमेध्यक्षिदृश्य
कुबेरात्मजो बद्धमृत्यैव यद्वत् त्वया मोचितौ भक्तिभाजौ कृतौ च
कुबेर आत्मा चो बद्धमृत्यैव यद्वत् त्वया मोचितो भक्तिभाजौ कृतौ च
तथा प्रेम भक्तिं स्वकामे प्रयच्छ न मोक्षे ग्रहो मेऽस्ति दामोदरेह
Tata prema bhaktim swakame prayacha namokshe graho mesti damodareya.
Namaste Studhamne Spuradipti Dhamne Tvadiyodarayatha Vishwasya Dhamne.
Namaste Studhamne Spuradipti Dhamne Tvadiyodarayatha Vishwasya Dhamne.
Namo Radhikaya Tvadiya Priyaya Namo Nantalilaya Devaya Tubhyam.
Namo Radhikaya Tvadiya Priyaya Namo Nantalilaya Devaya Tubhyam.
Namo Radhikaya Tvadiya Priyaya Namo Nantalilaya Devaya Tubhyam.
Radhikaya Tvadiya Priyaya Namo Nantalilaya Devaya Tubhyam.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Jaya Radha Damodara Radha Damodara Shri Radhe.
Radha Damodara Radha Damodara Radhe.
Jaya Radha Nila Madhav Radha Nila Madhav Shri Radhe. Jaya Jaya Prabhupada 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada.
Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada. Ranti Dave.
Namo नमस्ते नरसिंहाया
Namaste Narasimhaya
प्रहलादलाददायिने
Praladadadayini
हिरण्यकाशीपूर्वसः
Ranyakashipurvaksha
शीलाटङ्कनखालाये
Shilatam Kanakalaye
इतो नरसिंहा परतो नरसिंहा
Pito Nishinha Parato Nishinha
यतो यतो यामि ततो नरसिंहा
Yaso Yaso Yami Tato Nishinha
बहिर् नरसिंहा हृदे नरसिंहा
Aye Nishinha Idaye Nishinha
नरसिंहमदिं शरणं पर्पदे
Narasimhamadim Saranam Prabhade
तव कर कमलवरे नाकाम अद्भुत सिंहा दलिता हिरण्यकशिपुर तनुभृंगा केशवधीरता नरहरि रूपा जय जगदीश हरे जय जगदीश हरे जय जगदीश हरे कर कमल
Hare Kam Garuda Singha Ita Hiranyakasipu Anubhiya Isavadi Jai Jagadish Hare Jai Jagadish Hare Jai Jagadish Hare
केशवधीरता नरहरि रूपा जय जगदीश हरे जय जगदीश हरे जय जगदीश हरे
Keshavadita Narari Rupa Jaya Jagadish Hare Jaya Jagadish Hare Jaya Jagadish Hare
जयो लक्ष्मी नरसिंहा जयो लक्ष्मी नरसिंहा लक्ष्मी नरसिंहा जयो लक्ष्मी नरसिंहा
Narasimha Jaya Lakshmi Narasimha Jaya Lakshmi Narasimha Jaya Lakshmi Narasimha
जयो प्रहलाद महाराज प्रहलाद महाराज प्रहलाद महाराज जयो प्रहलाद महाराज
Jaya Prahlad Maharaj Jaya Prahlad Maharaj Jaya Prahlad Maharaj Jaya Prahlad Maharaj
जयो जयो प्रभुपाद 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 जयो जयो प्रभुपाद
Jaya Jaya Prabhupada 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada
नरसिंहदेव भगवान की प्रहलाद महाराज की और प्रमाण
Pindaye Tusidevaya Priyaye Kisavasya Cha Vishnu Bhakti Paridevi Satyvrata Namo Namaha Pindaye Tusidevaya Priyaye Kisavasya Cha Vishnu Bhakti Paridevi Satyvrata Namo Namaha Vrindaye Tulsi Devaya Priyaye Keshavasya Cha Vishnu Bhakti Pradidevi Satyavataya Namo Namaha. Vrindaye Tulsi Devi Maharani Ki Jai. Tulasi Krishna Preyasi Namo Namaha.
Tulasi Krishna Preyasi Namo Namaha.
Tulasi Krishna Preyasi Namo Namaha.
Radha Krishna Seva Pavo Hey Abhilashi.
Radha Krishna Deva Baba Hey Abhilashi.
Radha Krishna Seva Pavo Hey Abhilashi.
Radha Krishna Seva Baba Hey Abhilashi.
Ye Tumhara sharan loy Tara vach pura hoy.
Ye Tumhara sarana loy Tara mancha purna hoy.
Kripa kori karo tare Vrindavana vasi.
Kripa kori kara dare Vrindavana vasi.
Muraye Abhilash Vilas Kunja Diyavan.
Eko Mangalila Vilasa Kunjaliova.
Nayane Heri Bosada Yugalaru Parasi.
Aneri Basada Yugaltarasi.
Nivedanadara Sakirarugata Kora.
Nivedenadara Sakira Anugata Kora.
Seva Adhikara Diye Korone Dadasi.
Seva Adhikara De Koroni Jadasi.
Dina Krishna Dase Kohe Namora Hoy.
Dina Krishna Dasi Koi Namora Hoy.
Shri Radha Govinda Preme Sada Yena Basi.
Shri Radha Govinda Preme Sadayena Basi.
Shri Radha Govinda Preme
sadayena bhase.
यानि कानि च पापानि ब्रह्महत्यादिकानि च तानि तानि प्रणश्यन्ति प्रदक्षिणा पदे पदे.
Yani kani chapapani brahmahattadikani cha tani tani pani santi vadikshana bade bade.
यानि कानि च पापानि ब्रह्महत्यादिकानि च तानि तानि प्रणश्यन्ति प्रदक्षिणा पदे पदे.
Yani kani chapapani brahmahattadikani cha tani tani pani santi vadikshana bade bade.
यानि कानि च पापानि ब्रह्महत्यादिकानि च तानि तानि प्रणश्यन्ति प्रदक्षिणा पदे पदे.
Nani kani chapapani brahmahatyadikani cha tani tani panisanti varikshana bade bade.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Jaya Tulsi Maharani, Jaya Tulsi Maharani, Jaya Tulsi Maharani, Jaya Tulsi Maharani.
Jaya Tulsi Maharani, Jaya Tulsi Maharani, Jaya Tulsi Maharani, Jaya Tulsi Maharani.
Jaya Vrinda Devi, Jaya Vrinda Devi, Jaya Vrinda Devi, Jaya Vrinda Devi.
Jaya Vrinda Devi, Jaya Vrinda Devi, Jaya Vrinda Devi, Jaya Vrinda Devi.
Nitai Gaura Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaura Hari Bol.
Nitai Gaura Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaura Hari Bol.
Vrinda Devi Tulsi Maharani.
Tulsi Devi Maharani ki jai. Vrindaye Tulsi Deva Piyaye Keshavasya cha Vishnu Bhakti Pradi Devi Satyavrataya Namo Namaha. Vrindaye Tulsi Deva Piyaye Keshavasya cha Vishnu Bhakti Pradi Devi Satyavrataya Namo Namaha. Vrindaye Tulsi Deva Priyaye Keshavasya cha Vishnu Bhakti Pradi Devi Satyavrataya Namo Namaha. Vrindaye Tulsi Devi Maharani ki jai. I bow before you again and again. My desire is to obtain the service of Shri Radha and Krishna. Lord, take shelter of you as the wishes were filled. Bestow your mercy upon him and make him resident in Vrindavan. My desire is that you also grant me residence in the pleasure groves of Sri Vrindavan. Thus, within my vision, I'll always behold the beautiful pastimes of Radha and Krishna. I beg you to make me a follower of the cowherd damsels of Raja. Please give me the privilege of devotional service and make me your own maidservant. This very fallen and lowly servant of grace,
may I always swim in love with Shri Radha
and Govinda.
Srimati Tulsi Maharani Vrinda Devi ki jai. Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Shri Krishna Kanki
Jai. Chandrika Vitaranam
Vidyavadu Jivanam Anandam Buddhi Vardhanam Padiparam Purnam Rataswadanam Sarvatma Snapanam Param Vijayate Shri Krishna Sankirtanam Nam Namakari Vaudha
Nija Sarvasaktis Tatrapita Niyamitak Smaranena Kala
Etadishitava Kripa Bhagavan
Mamapi
Durdhaivam
Samihajanina Anuraga Trinadapi Sunichena Tarorapi Sahisnuna Amanina Manadena Kirtaniya Sadahari Nadanam Najanam Nasundarim Kavitam Jagadisha Kamaye Mama Janmani Janmanishware Bhavatar Bhakti Vahaituki Tvari Ainandatanu Jakinkaram Patitam Mam Vishame Bhavam Buddho Kripaya Tava Padapankija Stita Durisad Visam Vichintaya Nayanam Galata Surudaya Vadanam Gadgadurudaya Jira Tabanamagrahane Bhavishyati Yugaitam Nimesena Chaksusa Pavrasaitam Shunyayitam Jagat Sarvam Govinda Virahena Me Aslishava Padaratam Pinastumam Adarsanam Marmato Karotuva Yata Tata Bhavidata Tu Lampato Mat Prananatas Tu Sae Napuraha Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare
Mahaprabhu Shri Krishna Kanki
Jai.
Glory to Shri
Krishna
Krishna
Sankirtan. Cleanses the heart of all the dust accumulated for years and extinguishes the fire of conditional life of repeated birth and death. This Sankirtan movement is prime benediction for humanity at large because it spreads the rays of the benediction moon. It is the life of all transcendental knowledge. It increases the ocean of transcendental bliss and enables us to fully taste the nectar for which we are always anxious. O my Lord, your holy name alone can render all benediction to the living beings, and thus you have hundreds and millions of names like Krishna and Govinda. In these transcendental names you have invested all your transcendental energies. There are not even hard and fast rules for chanting these names. O my Lord, out of kindness you enable us to easily approach you by our holy names, but I am so unfortunate that I have no attraction for them. One should chant the holy name of the Lord in a humble state of mind, thinking oneself lower than a straw on the street. One should be more tolerant than a tree, devoid of all sense of false prestige, and should be ready to offer all respect to others. In such a state of mind, one can chant the holy name of the Lord constantly.
O Almighty Lord, I have no desire to accumulate wealth, nor do I desire beautiful women, nor do I want any number of followers. I only want your cause of devotional service, birth after birth. O Son of Maharaj Nanda Krishna, I am your eternal servant. Yet somehow or other I am falling in this ocean of birth and death. Please pick me up from this ocean of death and place me as one of the atoms at the Yolo's feet. O my Lord, open my eyes with decorated with tears of love flowing constantly when I chant your name.
When will my voice choke up, and when will the hairs on my body stand on end at the recitation of your holy name?
Oh Govinda, feeling your
Feeling of
separation,
separation,
I am considering a moment to be like 12 years or more.
Tears are
Tears are
flowing from my eyes like torrents of rain, and I am feeling all vacant in the world in your absence. I know no one but Krishna as my Lord, and he shall remain so, even if he handles me roughly by his embrace, or makes me broken-hearted by not being present before me. He is completely free to do anything and everything, for he is my worshipful Lord, unconditionally. Shri Chaitanya Siksastakam.
There are 10 offenses in matter of chanting the holy name of the Lord that should be avoided. They are as follows. 1. Blasphemy devotees dedicated. Consider names of demigods and Lord Shiva, Lord Brahma to be equal to or independent of name Lord Vishnu. 3. To disobey the orders of the spiritual master. 4. To blaspheme the Vedic literature or literatures and pursuance of Vedic tradition. 5. Consider the glory of chanting Hare Krishna to be imagination. 6. To give some interpretation of the holy name of the Lord. 7. To commit sinful activities on the strength of chanting holy name of the Lord. 8. To consider chanting Hare Krishna as one of the auspicious ritualistic activities which often Vedas as spiritual activity karma kanda. 9. To strike the fearless person by the glories of the holy name. And 10. To not have complete faith in chanting holy names and to maintain material attachments even for understanding so many instructions of this matter. It is also an offense to be inattentive while chanting. Every devotee who claims to be Vaishnava must carefully guard against 10 offenses in order to quickly achieve the desired success. Krishna Prem. Now let us offer our most humble obeisance unto all the Vaishnavas devoted to the Lord. They are just like desired trees, they can fulfill the desires of everyone, and they are full of compassion for the fallen, conditioned souls.
Kalpatarabhyascha, Vipasindarbhyevacha, Patitanam Pavanebhyo, Vaishnavebhyo, Namo Namaha, Vaishnava Thakur Ki Jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 7, verse number 37. Devadrisam nigama vartamani nistitanam. Nigama vartamani nistitanam purbir mayena vihitabir adrishyaturbihi. Lokan granatam mativimoham ati prabhobam. Ati pralobam vesam vidaya bahubasyata anupadharmyam. Devadrisam, of those who were envious of the devotees of the Lord. Nigama, the Vedas. Vartamani, on the path of. Nistitanam, of the well-situated. Purbihi, by rockets. Mayena, made by the great scientist Maya. Vihitabi, made by. Adrishya turbihi, unseen in the sky. Lokan, the different planets. Ganatam, of the killers. Mati vimoham, bewilderment of the mind. Ati pralobam, very attractive. Vesam, dress. Vidaya, having done so. Bahubasyate, will talk very much. Opadharmyam, sub-religious principles. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. When the atheists, after being well versed in the Vedic scientific knowledge, annihilate inhabitants of different planets, flying unseen in the sky on well-built rockets prepared by the great scientist Maya, the Lord will bewilder their minds by dressing himself attractively as Buddha and will preach on sub-religious principles. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. The incarnation of Lord Buddha is not the same Buddha incarnation we have in the present history of mankind. According to Srila Jiva Goswami, the Buddha incarnation mentioned in this verse appeared in a different Kali age. In the duration of life of one Manu, there are more than 72 Kali Yugas, and in one of them, the particular type of Buddha mentioned here would appear. Lord Buddha incarnates at a time when the people are most materialistic and preaches common sense religious principles. Such ahimsa is not a religious principle itself, but it is an important quality for persons who are actually religious. It is a common sense religion because one is advised to do no harm to any other animal or living being, because such harmful actions are equally harmful to he who does the harm. But before learning these principles of nonviolence, one has to learn two other principles, namely, to be humble and to be prideless. Unless one is humble and prideless, one cannot be harmless and nonviolent. And after being nonviolent, one has to learn tolerance and simplicity of life. One must offer respects to the great religious preachers and spiritual leaders, and also train the senses for controlled action, learning to be unattached to family and home, and enacting devotional service to the Lord, etc. At the ultimate stage, one has to accept the Lord because his devotee, and become his devotee, Otherwise, there is no religion. In religious principles, there must be God in the center. Otherwise, simple moral instructions are merely sub-religious principles, generally known as upadharma, or nearness to religious principles. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Gaur Premanandi Haribol. When the atheists, after being well-versed in the Vedic scientific knowledge, annihilate inhabitants of different planets, flying unseen in the sky on well-built rockets prepared by the great scientist Maya, the Lord will bewilder their minds by dressing himself attractively as Buddha, and will preach on sub-religious principles. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namani Namaste Saraswati Devi Guruvani Pujarine Nirvisesa Sunyavadi Paskati Desatari Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nishananda Sid Vaita Gadadhar Shivasti Gaur Bhaktivindam Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So this is an amazing verse. We learned that rockets are not something new. They were existing long, long ago, millions and millions of years ago. And there was a great materialistic scientist called Maya. Not Maya, but Maya. And he was building invisible rockets, carrying these atheists so that they could destroy inhabitants of different planets. However, the Lord will bewilder their minds by dressing himself attractively as Buddha, and will preach on sub-religious principles. Okay, this is like amazing if you just think about it. So this incarnation of Buddha, of course, as Prabhupada says, is different than the Buddha in this Kali Yuga. But there are cycles of time, and there's Satya Yuga, Treta Yuga, Dwapara Yuga, Kali Yuga. So in one lifetime of Brahma, there's at least, 72 Kali Yugas. So it's very important to have this concept, or understand the concept of time, because we like to localize everything to our very limited perception and time and space. But actually, by reading the Bhagavatam, our concept of time and space is tremendously expanded, as we see here. We suddenly realize that we live on a puny little planet in a gigantic universe, and there are many other universes also with many other planets, and we think we're so important, but actually we're just a little speck in time, and it gives us a perspective so that we don't get falsely puffed up and inflated with crazy ideas that we are unique in the whole universe. The only uniqueness one can have is becoming a devotee, because that's a rare thing. Manusyanam sahasresu kaschit jatati siddhaya jatatamapi siddhanam kaschit maham veti tattvata. Many, many thousands and thousands of people. One may try for perfection. Out of many, many of those who have attained perfection, only one will know Krishna in truth. So you want to be in a rarefied atmosphere, then become a devotee. But otherwise, everybody else are just specks in a gigantic universe, which is only part of many other universes. And the time and the space and our conceptualization of things is very, very, very limited. However, by appearing as Buddha and teaching these sub-religious principles, it's a little slow step toward Krishna consciousness, dealing with these hardcore atheists who are hell-bent on killing massively other people. Prabhupada said the scientific advancement has been very successful in killing people, not saving people. By the way, I have a nice announcement to make. Doctors in Israel are saying that 80 to 90% of the people that are getting sick and dying of COVID in Israel is due to the vaccine. That's what they just announced yesterday. And they're saying they're recommending people not to take the vaccine. and the same thing is happening in England and Israel now, where a large number of people, are very large number of people, much more than in the United States and many other countries, are vaccinated and have taken the extra vaccines also. They're the ones that are dying right now of COVID in Israel and England. So it's very interesting. There's a doctor. There's a YouTube interview with this doctor, who's a Jewish doctor, and he's saying, I'm in contact with the doctors in Israel. They're telling people now, don't take the vaccine. This is very interesting. But anyway, let's see what happens. Of course, nobody wants to talk about this because people are going to panic. Everyone that took the vaccine is starting to get panicked, So anyway, we see here something extremely interesting. Now, if we can understand what's being said in the latter part of this purport, it's very instructive for our life. Very, very instructive. It says, such ahimsa is not a religious principle itself, but it is an important quality for persons who are actually religious. It is a common sense religion because one is advised to do no harm to any other animal or living being, because such harmful actions are equally harmful to he who does the harm. In other words, if we like killing ants and eating meat, where we're paying other people to kill animals for us, and we enjoy watching violent movies where many people are being killed, and all other type of culture, it's going to harm us more than the people that are suffering. See? There's this one YouTube video of a devotee being severely beaten with sticks by these Bangladeshi jihadis, and until he's beaten to a pulp and he's completely unconscious. Right? It's a very horrible thing to see. But this type of hatred, the degree, the extreme of hatred of these jihadis is what is most remarkable. And actually, he who lives by the sword dies by the sword. This is a Bible saying. He who lives by the sword will die by the sword. So they're doing much more harm to themselves than they're causing to others. Why is it? Because if they don't suffer for their sins in this life, it's going to be 10 times worse, 100 times worse when they die. So we should have compassion for such people who are in such deep state of ignorance, what's going to happen to them. So Prabhupada explains here, but before learning these principles of nonviolence, one has to learn 2 other principles, namely to be humble and to be prideless. Well, that's what we were talking about yesterday. We're going to go back to that. The 18 points of real knowledge. And the first and the second, what are the first and second? Guess. What do you think are the first and second points of 18 points of knowledge in Bhagavad Gita, 13th chapter, 8th to 9th to 12th verse? What do you think, Prabhu? Guess. I just mentioned them. Humility and pridelessness. Amanitvam, adamitvam. If you want to be nonviolent, then you have to, is Prabhupada is saying here. But before learning these principles of nonviolence, one has to learn 2 other principles, namely to be humble and prideless. Unless one is humble and prideless, one cannot be harmless and nonviolent. So this is what our kids should be learning. These 18 points of real knowledge, as opposed to all the junk knowledge they're learning right now, so-called knowledge. And the first 2 are the most important. That is humility and pridelessness, amanitvam and adamitvam. And then it says, unless one is humble and prideless, one cannot be harmless and nonviolent. And after being nonviolent, one has to learn tolerance and simplicity of living. So tolerance, someone insults you, you have to learn to tolerate these things. Someone might even strike you. In the Bible it says, if you are smitten on the right cheek, then turn the left cheek so they can hit that one too. That's a Bible thing. Now, that doesn't mean you have to be a wimp and always suffering. But it does mean that one should be very, very tolerant. They should be tolerant with others and strict with oneself. But most people are tolerant with themselves, strict with others. It's the complete opposite of what you should be. So once you learn this humility and pridelessness, one should also learn tolerance and simplicity of living. That means one should be a minimalist. They should be self-controlled and not overindulgent in sense gratification. One should only have sense gratification according to Krishna consciousness, not according to the demon's concept of sense gratification, like Freud and other so-called psychologists. Prabhupada, in a letter, he says, psychologists are all nonsense. Let's say you have a marriage problem, you go to a psychologist. After a couple sessions, he'll tell you, well, I think it's better if you get divorced. That's their advice, right? That's why he says they're all nonsense, these people. Of course, we don't believe that. We think, oh no, they got PhDs, they graduated from Harvard. How can he be nonsense? Well, that's the most nonsense. If they have that degree, that means they're the most nonsense, not the least nonsense, right? So now one also must learn this tolerance, and this tolerance is explained in Bhagavad Gita in the 12th chapter. It says, Advaita sarva bhutanam maitra karuna evacha nirmama nirhankara samadukha sukham shami santustas tatam yogi yatatma drita nishchaya maya arpita mano buddhir yomad bhakta same priya. This is a very nice verse, 12th chapter, 13th and 14th verse. One who is not envious, but is a kind friend to all living entities, who does not think himself a proprietor, and is free from false ego, who is equal in both happiness and distress, who is tolerant, always satisfied, self-controlled, and engaged in devotional service with determination, his mind and intelligence fixed on me, Such a devotee of mine is very dear to me. You want to be dear to Krishna? You should definitely read this verse and find out those qualities that Krishna will appreciate in you if you do it. And in the purport, Prabhupada says, coming again to the point of pure devotional service, the Lord is describing the transcendental qualifications of a pure devotee in these two verses. You want to be a pure devotee? Study these two verses, 12th chapter, 13th and 14th verses. A pure devotee is never disturbed in any circumstances, nor is he envious of anyone, nor does a devotee become his enemy's enemy. He thinks, this person is acting as my enemy due to my own past misdeeds. So it is better to suffer than to protest. In the Srimad Bhagavatam 10.14.8, it is stated, Tate nukampam susamiksamano punjana evatmakritam vipakam. Whenever a devotee is in distress or has fallen into difficulty, he thinks that it is the Lord's mercy upon him. He thinks, thanks to my past misdeeds, I should suffer far, far greater than I am suffering now. So it is by the mercy of the Supreme Lord that I am not getting all the punishment I am due. I am just getting a little by the mercy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Therefore, he is always calm, quiet, and patient despite many distressful conditions. This is real Krishna consciousness. This is real lakshana, qualities of a pure devotee. We should learn what's being said here. This is if you want to be a pure devotee. If you don't want to be a pure devotee, you can just stay at home and sleep, right? Just sleep, sleep, sleep. Don't listen, don't listen, don't listen. So you grow up to be a nonsense. But if you want to be a pure devotee, you have to listen very carefully to this. No one can say, I didn't know. What do you mean you didn't know? That means you didn't try to know. That's what it means. All the knowledge is there. Prabhupada hasn't hidden any. There's no hidden knowledge that, this is only a secret for the high IQ people. No, he's given the whole knowledge. But you have to have a simple life. You have to accept a life of simplicity. Very simple, not overeating, not oversleeping, not over self-indulging, not over talking nonsense, not playing around with gadgets all the time. You have to be self-controlled to be Krishna conscious. See? So, therefore, yesterday we started to hear the 18 points of knowledge. Now, this is a very important thing to know, because if we know this 18 points of knowledge, we will avoid most problems in life. So this is explained in the 10th mantra of the Ishopanishad and the 13th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, verses 8 to 12. Both places Prabhupada explains the 18 points of knowledge. Now, yesterday we covered Amanidvam Adamidvam Ahimsa Santarajam Acharya Pasaman Socham Stayam Atva Vinigraha Indriyarte Suvairagyam Anahankara Evacha Janmityu Jara Vyadi Dukadosana Darshanam. Okay. And then it says, Asaktiran Visvamba Putra Dara Gihadisu Nityam Chaj Samachitatma Istanistu Papadisu. We stop right there. That is on point number 13 and 14. Let's go back to that. Okay. So, 14 is steadiness. So let's start from there and we'll finish the 18. Steadiness means that one should be very determined to make progress in spiritual life. Without such determination, one cannot make tangible progress. And self-control means that one should not accept anything which is detrimental to the path of devotional service. or path of devotion, of spiritual progress. One should become accustomed to this and reject anything which is against the path of spiritual progress. This is real renunciation. So, in the Ishopanishad, point 14 says, one should not be more attached to wife, children, and home than the revealed scriptures ordain. So we discussed this, but we'll discuss it again, because sometimes people like to make an indictment of Krishna consciousness. They say, see, this means that you should hate your family. They're teaching that. The Hare Krishnas are teaching hate your family. No, that's not what it says here. Okay, so what does it say? Well, it says that one should develop a spiritual vision to understand that I'm not this body. I am the soul. And in this body, there are two souls. There's my individual Jivatma, and there's Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Parameshwara. Therefore, the vision of a devotee is he doesn't really see the body of a person. He sees their soul in relationship to Krishna. Therefore, everyone is potentially a devotee of Krishna. They have just forgotten. And therefore, the devotee does everything to help them remember their relationship with Krishna, whether it's a family member or an outside person. This is what it's talking about when it says one should not be more attached to wife, children, or husband and home than the revealed scriptures ordain. So the revealed scriptures say that as long as, and then we're going to read this now, Prabhupada's going to explain it, as long as the family members are not inimical to Krishna consciousness, one should be always respectful and do their duty. Now, doing your duty is different than sense gratification. Your duty means that you should help not only yourself but your family members to be Krishna conscious and make things very comfortable so they're not in anxiety, and always be kind and gentle. In other words, to do that you have to be humble and prideless. You have to be non-violent, and you have to be tolerant, and you have to be, and let's see what else it says here. It says it says after being non-violent, one has to learn tolerance and simplicity. So you should have a minimalist life in the family. Just a few good things are much more satisfying than a whole bunch of nonsense things. Right? So if you have a few good things, like let's say you like to have khichdi, instead of having 15 different things on your plate, you like to have khichdi, maybe a little bit of chutney, and you're satisfied. Like if you go to Mayapur, every day they eat khichdi, and they love it, right? If there's no khichdi, they think there's the brahmacharis. They think there's something going wrong here, right? Or they'll make their own khichdi because they'll make a big pile of rice and then they pour some dal on top of rice and then mix it like that. Have you ever seen them eat in Mayapur? They mix it like this. And they go like this. They always go like this, and they throw it in their mouth. They make a little ball and they throw it in their mouth. See? So if they don't make khichdi, they make their own khichdi with the rice and the dal, right? So this is a simple life. Right? And it's very, very healthy to eat just a few things every day that are very well made. Right? Like yesterday, they made a sambar from the breakfast, a sambar and a chakra pongal. Right? That was the worst sambar and chakra pongal I've ever seen. Way overspiced, way more. You have to learn how to cook. If you're not trained to cook, don't do it, because it'll be a mess, because you're cooking for Krishna. You're not cooking for yourself. You're not cooking for other people. You're cooking for Krishna. So you have to learn to be an expert cook. Expert cooks don't put too much junk in a preparation. They just put a few things, and they're well dosed, and it's delicious. Right? Because you're cooking for Krishna, you have to know how to cook. If you don't know how to cook, ask somebody. Get trained. So with a few good things, very good things in life, a person is satisfied. You don't need a lot of things. You just need a few things. This is called simplicity. You make life very, very simple, and that way you have more time for Krishna consciousness. Then it says, one must offer respects to great religious preachers and spiritual leaders, and also train the senses for controlled action. Train the senses for controlled action. You don't give in to the senses. You're not led by the senses. You control the senses by not going past the what you would call the protective line. Just like sometimes when you read some Ramayanas, they say that Lakshman made this protective circle around Sita Devi, so that no one could come into it. So then Ravana convinced her to step out of it to serve him. That's not in the Valmiki Ramayana, but sometimes in other Ramayanas they say that. So we should also have this Lakshman's circle. And we should understand where we should not infringe or go past that line of demarcation, where beyond that one is in very dangerous state. So when you're training the senses to be controlled, that is the four regulative principles of Krishna consciousness. Know this, know that, and do this and do that. So 4 means 8, actually. The things you should never do and the things you should always do. So if we stay within that circle, it's a circle of protection. It keeps us protected from falling into illusion. And then it says, one must offer respects to great religious preachers and spiritual leaders, and also train the senses for controlled action. Learning to be unattached to family and home, and enacting devotional service to the Lord. Now, Prabhupada is going to explain what this means. Learning to be unattached to family and home, and enacting devotional service to the Lord. At the ultimate stage, one has to accept the Lord and become his devotee. Otherwise, there is no religion. In religious principles, there must be God in the center. Otherwise, simple moral instructions are merely sub-religious principles generally known as upadharma, or only nearness to religious principles. Now Prabhupada is going to explain very clearly what he means by this not being attached to family and home. He says, as for detachment from children, wife, and home, it is not meant that one should have no feeling for these. They are natural objects of affection, but when they are not favorable to spiritual progress, then one should not be attached to them. The best process for making the home pleasant is Krishna consciousness. If one is in full Krishna consciousness, he can make his home very happy, because this process of Krishna consciousness is very easy. One need only chant Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, and accept the remnants of foodstuffs offered to Krishna, and have some discussion on books like Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam, and engage oneself in deity worship. These 4 things will make one happy. One should train the members of his family in this way. The family members can sit down morning and evening and chant together, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. If one can mold his family life in this way to develop Krishna consciousness, following these 4 principles, then there is no need to change from family life to renounced life. Wow. So if you're afraid of taking sannyas, here's your loophole right here. You can stay with your family also. If you train your family to be Krishna conscious, then there's no reason to leave the family, right? But if you can't do that, and you're somewhat nonsense, and there's complete nonsense, then you have to take a more severe step, and that is become a complete renunciate, renounce everything. But on the other hand, if your family is Krishna conscious and really Krishna conscious, there's no need to leave. There it is right there. If you want to read this, it's the 13th chapter, verses 12 and 13. Okay, 13th chapter, verses, 8 to 12. Then Prabhupada says, but if it, meaning the family life, is not congenial, in other words, happy, and Krishna consciousness, not favorable for spiritual advancement, then family life should be abandoned. One must, no, but not right away, after the children are grown. Then you can abandon. One must sacrifice everything to realize or serve Krishna, just as Arjuna did. Arjuna did not want to kill his family members, but when he understood that these family members, meaning the Kauravas, they were led by Dhritarashtra and Duryodhana, that these family members were impediments to his Krishna realization. He accepted the instruction of Krishna and fought and killed them. In all cases, one should be detached from the happiness and distress of family life, because in this world one can never be fully happy or fully miserable. So there it is. If you want to know what it means to be detached, that's what it means. It doesn't mean you hate your family. It doesn't mean that you just got married and now you hate your wife and the one kid that you have and you're going to leave and take sannyas. Don't ever do that. That's the biggest mistake you could ever make. No. If you bring children into the world, your obligation, your duty, is to make sure that they get a good spiritual education. And even if that's not possible, you still cannot abandon them. You have to wait until they're married and independent. And you also have to get your wife's permission to take sannyas. So this is the real understanding of detachment. You act out of duty. You don't just become a crazy person and reject your family and run away and never help them again. That's not the idea. Okay, so then that's point number 14. Then point number 15, one should not be happy or distressed over desirables and undesirables, knowing that such feelings are just created by the mind. So the mind plays many tricks on us. We think, this is good, and that is bad. There's no such thing as this is good and bad. Everything is bad in the material world, you see. Just like someone wins the lottery, and all of a sudden they go from earning $32,000 a year to owning $5 million. Now, is that a blessing? Is that good? Actually, it's not. Most people that do that, it ruins their life. Because it attracts, just like if you have a lot of sugar in your blood and go to India, it attracts the mosquitoes. They can sense that you got some sweet blood, and they'll bite you like anything. See? But if you train yourself to eat bitter things before you go to India, they'll leave you alone. Or they might bite you once, and then they'll spread the news. Don't bite this guy. He's bitter as hell, you know. Bite his wife. Yeah, she's got plenty of sweets, right? So, you see, the mosquitoes are not dumb either, right? They know what they want. And if you have trained yourself, and that's why Jaipataka Maharaj was always very kind. Whenever we used to go to India, in the morning he would give us the little balls of neem leaves that had been crushed and mixed with a little bit of water and some spice or some sugar, some salt, and we would eat these bitter balls of neem early in the morning. But these were fresh leaves. They were not old leaves. They were fresh leaves. They were sort of beaten up and made into a pulp, and then mixed, I think, with a little bit of salt, and then made into little balls, and then we would eat those. Right? So he was being kind to us. See, there's two ways of dealing with the mosquitoes. One is you get poison to kill them, but that poison also kills people. Or you eat a lot of neem and make your blood not sweet, but bitter. And then they might bite you once or twice, then they leave you alone. Okay, so 15.15 of knowledge. One should not be happy or distressed over desirables and undesirables, knowing that such feelings are just created by the mind. And in the Bhagavad Gita, Prabhupada explains this also. He says, one should learn, he says, happiness and distress are concomitant factors of material life. That means whenever you're happy, distress will come. And whenever you're in distress, some happiness will come also. They're concomitant. They always come together. Like whenever you engage in sense gratification, definitely misery will come after that. Definitely. It's a law of nature. Just like there's a law of gravity. Anything goes up comes down. Also, it's a law of nature that if we engage in sense gratification, misery will come right away. In fact, if you want to know where that's said, it is the 5th chapter, 12th verse of Bhagavad Gita. Let's take a look at that. As I've said before, everything is in the Bhagavad Gita. One second. Okay, I'm sorry. It's 5th chapter, 20. Okay, we'll come back to this. I'll come back to it and find it later. Just look one more time. Okay, I'll come back to it. All right. So, therefore it says that one should learn to tolerate, as advised in Bhagavad Gita. One can never restrict the coming and going of happiness and distress. So one should be detached from the materialistic way of life and be automatically equipoised in both cases. Generally, when we get something desirable, we are very happy. And when we get something undesirable, we are distressed. But if we are actually in the spiritual position, these things will not agitate us. To reach that stage, we have to practice unbreakable devotional service. Devotional service to Krishna without deviation means engaging oneself in 9 processes of devotional service: chanting, hearing, worshipping, offering respects, etc. As described in the last verse of the 9th chapter, that process should be followed. So here's a very, very instructive teaching that Prabhupada is giving us, that Krishna is giving us, that happiness and distress come together always. And it's just part of material life. I mean, if everything was good, we wouldn't want to go back to Godhead. We would want to stay in the material world and just keep enjoying sense gratification. But as soon as there's sense gratification, there's going to be misery also. And let me see if I can find that. Oh, I think I see why. I'm looking at that one right now. Yes, it's 522. Therefore, those who are true yogis or learned transcendentalists are not attracted by sense pleasures, which are the causes of continuous material existence. The more one is addicted to material pleasures, the more he is entrapped by material miseries. There it is, right there. Misery always follows sense gratification. And that's why he says here that one can never restrict the coming and going of happiness and distress. So one should be detached from the materialistic way of life and be automatically equipoised in both cases. So reading this 18 points of knowledge is extremely important. This is real knowledge. What we learn in school is not real knowledge. It's all about how to increase sense gratification. But this is teaching us the opposite, how to control it and how to not be victimized by it. And then it says, point 16, and this is probably one of the most important points of knowledge, it is the most important point of knowledge. It says, Maichananya Yogena. Let's see. Maichananya Yogena Bhaktir Avyabhicharine. He says that one should become an unalloyed devotee of the personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, and serve him with rapt attention. That is the most important of the 18 points. That one should become a genuine devotee of the Lord and serve him with full attention, day and night. And therefore it says, but if we are actually in a spiritual position, then these things will not agitate us. To reach that stage, we have to practice unbreakable devotional service. That's Maichananya Yogena. Devotional service to Krishna without deviation means engaging oneself in the 9 processes of devotional service: chanting, hearing, worshipping, offering respect, etc., as described in the last verse of the 9th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. That process should be followed. Naturally, when one is adapted to the spiritual way of life, he will not want to mix with materialistic men. That would go against his grain. One may test himself by seeing how far he is inclined to live in a solitary place without unwanted association. Naturally, a devotee has no taste for unnecessary sporting or cinema going or enjoying some social function because he understands that these are simply a waste of time. There may be research scholars and philosophers who study sex life or some other subject, but according to Bhagavad Gita, such research work and philosophical speculation have no value. That is more or less nonsensical. According to Bhagavad Gita, one should make research by philosophical discretion into the nature of the soul. One should make research to understand the self. That is recommended here. So, this point that one should become an unalloyed devotee of the personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, and serve him with rapt attention, is the real beginning of spiritual life. And then it says, 17, one should develop a liking for residence in a secluded place with a calm and quiet atmosphere favorable for spiritual culture. One should avoid congested places where non-devotees congregate. So, Asat Sangha Tyaga E Vaishnavachar. You can understand who is a devotee by this mantra that Lord Chaitanya gave to his devotees. He said, Asat Sangha Tyaga, one who gives up the association of unholy people and accepts the association of genuine devotees, that is a Vaishnava. That's how you recognize a Vaishnava. They give up the association of unholy people. And then finally, one should become a scientist or philosopher and conduct research into spiritual knowledge, not into sex knowledge or rocket knowledge or ITT knowledge or this knowledge or that knowledge. One should be a scientist or philosopher and conduct research into spiritual knowledge, recognizing that spiritual knowledge is permanent, whereas material knowledge ends with the death of the body. And Prabhupada writes, and this is absolutely amazing, you should all read the 10th mantra of Ishopanishad. He says, these 18 items combine to form a gradual process by which real knowledge can be developed. Except for these 18 points, all other methods are considered to be in the category of ignorance. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakura, a great acharya, maintained that all forms of material knowledge are merely external features of the illusory energy, and that by cultivating them, one becomes no better than an ass. This same principle is found here in the Ishopanishad, Sri Ishopanishad. By advancement of material knowledge, modern man is simply being converted into an ass. Some materialistic politicians in spiritual guise decry the present system of civilization as satanic. But unfortunately, they do not care about the culture of real knowledge as it is described in the Bhagavad Gita. Thus, they cannot change the satanic situation. This is so true. Like, for example, I'm invited now to be a guest speaker for a group of Hindus who worship the Indian flag and so forth. Now, what am I going to say? They're inviting me as the guest of honor. What am I going to say? Am I going to speak a bunch of platitudes that are nonsense, or am I going to speak the truth? No, I have to speak the truth, right? And if I don't speak the truth, then I'm violating my mandate as a teacher, right? But how am I going to speak the truth? In a brutal way, or in a, let's say, gentle way? Well, in between those two. Because to get a message across, you have to be somewhat brutal, right? Especially with people who are thick-headed and are addicted to techniques that are destined to fail. Destined to fail. However, we cannot be too brutal, otherwise they won't want to listen. So there has to be a medium by which to communicate so that they can hear, but yet not make it so watered down that they can go on with their nonsense. So anyway, in a modern society, even a boy thinks himself self-sufficient and pays no respect to elderly men. Due to the wrong type of education being imparted in our universities, boys all over the world are giving their elders headaches. Thus, Sri Ishopanishad very strongly warns that the culture of ignorance is different from that of knowledge. The universities are, so to speak, centers of ignorance only. This is Prabhupada's words, right? It's not my words, although I repeat this a lot. This is his words. This is Bhaktivinoda Thakur's words. And ultimately, it's Krishna's words. The universities are, so to speak, centers of ignorance only. Consequently, scientists are busy discovering lethal weapons to wipe out the existence of other countries. This is nothing new. That's what we just read today. We read today that when the atheists, after being well-versed in the Vedic scientific knowledge, annihilate inhabitants of different planets, flying unseen in the sky on well-built rockets prepared by the great scientist Maya, the Lord will bewilder their minds by dressing himself attractively as Buddha and will preach on sub-religious principles. Well, the universities are, so to speak, centers of ignorance only. Consequently, scientists are busy discovering lethal weapons to wipe out the existence of other countries. University students today are not given instructions in the regulative principles of brahmacharya, celibate student life, nor do they have any faith in any scriptural injunctions. Religious principles are taught for the sake of name and fame only, and not for the sake of practical action. Thus, there is animosity not only in social and political fields, but in the field of religion as well. Nationalism has developed in different parts of the world due to the cultivation of ignorance by the general people. No one considers that this tiny earth is just a lump of matter floating in immeasurable space along with many other lumps. In comparison to the vastness of space, these material lumps are like dust particles in the air. Because God has kindly made these lumps of matter complete in themselves, they are perfectly equipped with all the necessities for floating in space. The drivers of our spaceships may be very proud of their achievements, but they do not consider the supreme driver of these greater, more gigantic spaceships called planets. There are innumerable suns and innumerable planetary systems also. As infinitesimal parts and parcels of the Supreme Lord, we small creatures are trying to dominate these unlimited planets. Thus, we take repeated birth and death and are generally frustrated by old age and disease. The span of human life is scheduled for about 100 years, although it is gradually decreasing to 20 or 30 years. Thanks to the culture of ignorance, befooled men have created their own nations within these planets in order to grasp sense enjoyment more effectively for these few years. Such foolish people draw up various plans to render national demarcations perfectly, meaning making nations and boundaries and borders. A task that is totally impossible. Well, we see that now at the southern border of the United States. It's a border, but people are coming across it in hundreds and thousands, not hundreds and a few thousand, but hundreds of thousands of people at a time. Right? Yet for this purpose, each and every nation has become a source of anxiety for others. More than 50% of a nation's energy is devoted to defense measures and thus spoiled. No one cares for the cultivation of real knowledge, and yet people are falsely proud of being advanced in both material and spiritual knowledge. Sri Ishopanishad warns us of this faulty type of education, and the Bhagavad Gita gives instructions as to the development of real knowledge. This mantra states that the instructions of vidya, knowledge, must be acquired from a dhira. A dhira is one who is not disturbed by material illusion. No one can be undisturbed unless he is perfectly spiritually realized, at which time one neither hankers nor laments for anything. A dhira realizes that the material body and the mind he has acquired by chance through material association are but foreign elements, and therefore he simply makes the best use of a bad bargain. I'm going to stop right there. There's more to, well, we have a few minutes more. Let me finish it. The material body and mind are bad bargains for the spiritual living entity. The living entity has actual functions in the living spiritual world, but this material world is dead. As long as the living spiritual sparks, or souls, manipulate the dead lumps of matter, meaning the body, the dead world appears to be a living world. Actually, it is the living souls, the parts and parcels of the Supreme Living Being, who move the world. The dhiras, or the persons who are extremely self-controlled and tolerant, have come to know all these facts by hearing them from superior authorities and have realized this knowledge by following the regulative principles. So it doesn't say by reading, by hearing, and by following the regulative principles. To follow the regulative principles, one must take shelter of a bona fide spiritual master. The transcendental message and regulative principles come down from the spiritual master to the disciple. Such knowledge does not come in the hazardous way of ignorant education or modern education. One can become a dhira, self-controlled, and very tolerant, only by submissive hearing from a bona fide spiritual master. One can become a dhira only by submissive hearing from a bona fide spiritual master. Arjuna, for example, became a dhira by submissively hearing from Lord Krishna, the personality of Godhead himself. Thus, the perfect disciple must be like Arjuna, and the spiritual master must be as good as the Lord himself. This is the process of learning vidya, knowledge, from the dhira, the undisturbed. The adhira, one who has not undergone the training of a dhira, cannot be an instructive leader. Modern politicians who pose themselves as dhiras are actually adhiras, and one cannot expect perfect knowledge from them. They are simply busy seeing to their own remuneration in dollars and cents. How, then, can they lead the mass of people to the right path of self-realization? Thus, one must hear submissively from a dhira in order to attain actual education. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Srimad Shri Ishopanishad ki jai, Srimad Bhagavad Gita Grantaraj ki jai, Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Gaur Premanandi. Hari Bol, Hari Bol. Are there any questions? Now, don't be afraid, ask a question. Okay, all glories to Prabhupada. Krishna. Shri Guru Charana Padma Kevala Bhakati Sadma. Shri Guru Charana Padma Kevala Bhakati Sadma Bando Mui Savadana Mate Bando Mui Savadana Mate Janara Prasade Bhai He Bhavatoriya Jai Krishna Prapti Hoya Hoite Krishna Prapti Hoya Hoite Guru Mukha Padma Vakya Chitete Goriya Arana Koriya Maneya Sa Arana Koriya Maneya Sa Shri Guru Charane Rati Hese Uttama Gati Ye Prasade Pure Sarva Sa Ye Prasade Pure Sarva Sa Chakshudana Lila Jai Janme Janme Prabhu Se Divya Jnani De Prokasito Prema Bhakti Jaha Hote Avidya Vinasa Jate Vedigai Janaracharito Shri Guru Karuna Sindhu Adana Janara Bandhu Lokenath Lokera Jivana Prabhu Kora Doya De Amori Pada Joya Ebeya Sugusakti Bhuvana Ha Prabhu Kora Doya De Amori Pada Chaya Ha Prabhu Kora Doya Deha More Pada Chaya Ebeas kusukti bhuvana Ebeas kusukti bhuvana Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Namo Vishnupadaya, Krishna Prestaya Bhutale. Shrimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namini Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Sunyavadi Paskatya Desatarine. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vindam. Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vindam. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vindam. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Nitya Gaura Hari Bol Hari Bol Hari Bol Nitya Gaura Hari Bol Nitya Gaura. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, jai Om Vishnupad Paramhansa Paramajika Chasta Tarasatri Shri Srimad. His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Goswami Maharaj, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai, Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur ki jai. Prem Se Kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasudeva Gaura Bhaktivedanta ki jai. Shri Radha Krishna Gopinath Sam Kunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhan ki jai. Vrindavan Dham ki jai, Mayapura Dham ki jai, Jagannath Puri Dham ki jai, Tulasi Devi ki jai, Bhakti Devi ki jai, Ganga Maya ki jai, Jamuna Maya ki jai, Samaveda Bhakta Vrinda ki jai, Nitai Gaura Premanandi. All glories to the Assembled Devotee, all glories to the Assembled Devotee, all glories to the Assembled Devotee, all glories to Shri Guru and Shri Guranga, all glories to Srila Prabhupada, Patita Pavana ki jai. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutali, Shrimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Nitanami. Namaste Saraswati Devi, Guruvani Pachani, Nirvisesa Sunyavadi, Paskatya Saturn. The lotus feet of our spiritual master are the only way by which we can attain the pure devotional service. I bow down to his lotus feet with great awe and reverence. By his grace, one can cross the ocean of material suffering and obtain the mercy of Krishna. My only wish is to have my consciousness purified by the words emanating from his lotus mouth. Attachment to his lotus feet is the perfection that fulfills all desires. He opens my darkened eyes and fills my heart with transcendental knowledge. He is my Lord, birth after birth. From him ecstatic prema emanates. By him ignorance is destroyed. The Vedic scriptures sing of his character. Our spiritual master is the ocean of mercy, the friend of the poor and Lord and master of devotees. O Master, be merciful unto us. Give us the shade of your lotus feet. Your fame is spread throughout all the three worlds. We take shelter of lotus feet. Jai Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutani Srimati Bhaktivedanta. Namaste Saraswati Devi Guruvani Pachani. Namaste Saraswati Devi. Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol.